Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. I am Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am very excited for today's ALN BIMStorm workshop. You can see some of our speakers here today in front of you, and we'll be hearing more from them in just a moment. But before we get underway, we just want to thank our ALN Platinum organizational member, Onuma System, building informed environments, and you can find out more at onuma-bim.com. And you'll hear more from Kimon Onuma and his associate today in the workshop. We also want to thank our ALN patron members and all our organizational members for making programming like this possible, as well as our newsletter and the upcoming every Thursday, ALN Thursday at 3 this week features Richard Culbertson, an ALN Board of Directors member and a senior fellow. So that's tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. And with that, I will say there on the invite, it said 60 minutes. We will do an hour program at least and certainly go into overtime. So please stick around if you're able. Other than that, please participate. Send any questions, comments, or feedback to the chat, or you can use the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar. Mike Bordenaro, Executive Director for the ALN, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Nick. And this is a really exciting program. It's kind of a culmination of sorts. Kimon Onuma introduced me to Jack Dempsey, who will be speaking today. Kimon works with Yong Kim, who will be speaking also. And then Jack Dempsey introduced me to the ALN, and boom, now the ALN is putting a spotlight back on Onuma Inc. And what they have been doing since they started BIMStorm in 2007, 8, 6, depending on when you count it, they have been sharing best practices. They have been using a BIMStorm virtual environment to show that you don't have to travel around the world to get together to bring the best out of the experts that you want to bring to a project. And the best practices that Kimon is going to be showing with Yong today are incredible. It is the use of artificial intelligence to create a building program that is fed into the Onuma system to create a building information model. I believe this will be the first time that this is publicly demonstrated. And for Kimon and Yong and Onuma Inc. to make public this high level of intellectual property is just really humbling. So thank you to Kimon Onuma for showing us this. And what we're doing is trying to take the perspective of an owner, the owner of a university that wants to add a health clinic. And we had a session a couple of weeks ago where it was determined that we should think in terms of a women's health clinic, because on a university or in a disaster, there are special needs that women have, and a health clinic that's focusing on women is probably a good thing to give to the world. So we're looking at that, and we're looking at these best practices. Kimon will be showing us how he's using Mural to communicate about the project, and that in itself is a best practice. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to bring on Kimon to introduce himself and what he's got in store for us. Thank you, Kimon.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks to ALN for hosting this. We're going to try and have some fun today. So it's a workshop, so we're going to be a little bit free form, but I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about BIMStorm and getting into what we'll be showing today. And like Mike mentioned, we'll be using a mural, and I'll introduce you a little bit to the mural as we go along here. But first, we are going to be talking about ChatGPT, like Mike mentioned. We've been experimenting. It's still very early, as we all know. Some people have tried it themselves, and there's a lot of pretty interesting things that you can do. So, for example, for those that don't know about it, it's a online artificial intelligence tool, and there's different versions of it. I'm going to use it called the 3.5 version, the simplest one. You can ask it questions like, what is BIMStorm? So I'll let ChatGPT kind of tell you what the BIMStorm is about. You can obviously find this on the web. There's certain things that are pretty straightforward and with ChatGPT, and it's not perfect. It makes mistakes, which is the other interesting part, why you need to have kind of a human interaction to that. We'll get more into that later on as we dive
Jack
into the
or
BIMStorm
Kimon,
results.
maybe this is a good time for me to correct my mistake, because I was going to ask Jack to talk a little bit about his involvement with artificial intelligence and asset management. So thank you, Nick, for reminding me to bring Jack Dempsey on. Jack Dempsey is an ALN board member, and his company is an ALN member. And he just sent out a newsletter on the subject. Jack.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about this opportunity to see what Kimon has done. We're starting to see a lot more of the Chat GPT out there and how people are using it. It's a pretty exciting technology. What I've been looking at is how does that apply to decision making? A couple of different areas that I looked at is one is, like, for example, leadership questions. And I'm finding that ChatGPT really isn't able to make those questions. Those are kind of human-led questions. ChatGPT can inform and assist and do all that kind of stuff, but isn't really there making those decisions. But it's a pretty exciting and powerful technology, and I think Kimon's demonstration today will show us just where that can go. So that's going to be really exciting. The quick other thing I was looking at, the artificial intelligence, is a concept that I termed the lucent edge. As these systems become complex, behaviorally oriented, evaluating patterns and learning from patterns and applying those patterns, that there's going to be something of a decision capability that could be built in within the technology. And at some point, it evolves into some form of awareness. And all I've done in this newsletter is just raise the point that there's a boundary condition when that starts happening. And this newsletter just basically suggests this is something that the industry should start talking about and figuring out. It may be years from now, it may be here today, it may be decades from now. We don't know when this is really going to happen, but it's definitely going to happen. And I think as we talk about ethics and integrity and solutions that are being developed with human empowered capabilities, that boundary condition, the lucent edge, is something that I think is going to be deserving of some more attention. So looking forward to conversations that the industry is going to do as we kind of plod through all of this together. So that's all I have is just a starting point. I'm really looking forward to how Kimon has applied Chat GPT and AI to kind of assist some of the capabilities that we're going to show here with the BIMStorm.
Excellent. Thanks, Jack. And one other point that I should have mentioned earlier, this is interactive. I see a lot of old friends from all around the world. Hi, Alan. Hi, Deke. Hi, Ryan. It's really nice to see everybody again. Please use the chat or the Q&A part of Zoom to break in and ask questions. And some people might want to speak. We can turn you into panelists. This is a workshop, so let's roll up our sleeves and learn by doing.
Yeah, that's great. So just some more logistics as we start off. Actually, Mike, we're going for 60 minutes, but we are going to have overtime to 90 minutes, right?
Correct.
So people are aware. Yeah. I put a link in the chat, not the Chat GPT, the Zoom chat to this mural. Mural is a tool that we've been using a lot. It's very easy to use, kind of a whiteboard, and we invite you to jump in if you'd like, or you can just watch me run through it. But just to give you some basics about it, it's basically a tool where you can actually grab a sticky note and just add a sticky note and say, I have an idea. You can connect. You have another one, you can actually create another one right here and say, well, here's the idea, whatever. So feel free to jump in and either watch what's going on screen or put any ideas you have here. You can also grab files from your desktop. For example, I have these images here that I can just grab an image and drag it onto Mural. So you can post images real quickly and resize them. And it's kind of an infinite canvas. Basically, you can zoom all the way out and keep adding more and more and more to it. So we'll be using that today to capture what's going on. And I see Roger's here too. We didn't introduce Roger, right?
Hi.
Roger on
Roger is
Yeah.
Roger is with the National Institute of Building Sciences, has been involved with BIM and BIMstorms for a long time. And Roger, anytime you would like to jump in, we can make you a panelist. Just communicate through the chat. All right, so so Deke got kicked out of the mural. So try again. The link to access to the mural is in the chat higher up. You can scroll up to.
I just put it in again. Yeah.
And it's there in there again.
Mhm.
And this is as much of a best practice to share as BIM and artificial intelligence. There used to be mind maps. And this would be a way for people to get a bunch of ideas down. And my experience with Mural since Kimon introduced it to me is that it's very easy to use.
Okay, so back to BIMStorm a little bit. We're on what we're calling the 2023 Asset Leadership Network, BIMStorm, for higher education and emergency planning. It builds up on a lot of the previous ones. So for example, last year we had one with ALN for microgrid planning for Kharkiv in the Ukraine, how to get energy to a hospital in Ukraine, including the logistics of shipping it there. So there's a lot of good information that was generated here. And in fact, we captured details about the types of assets that are needed for a microgrid, and those details were captured in a form. So these is actually from other subject matter experts that knew about microgrids, for example. And there was a place where they could fill in the information in a form, and we captured. So it's all kind of data-centric way of capturing information and being able to share it. And we're going to use that as well today too. So that was the microgrid BIMStorm. And then we also had quite a few over the years about other things about asset management and data as an asset. So we're using a lot of those, and then a COVID response one too. How do you plan for a field hospital and COVID responses? Continuing on those themes. So we have a lot of this information kind of built up. We're using it, we're repurposing it, and going to be using it for this session as well. And if I jump back to the mural for a second. So one of the challenges that we've presented before as far as asset management goes is a lot of things aren't connected. Databases don't talk to each other. But our goal is really to think in terms of a platform and an ecosystem. When you start connecting the dots, you can say, okay, we're planning something for a new clinic over here. And now we need to think in terms of risk management, like Jack was mentioning earlier. What's the mission? How do you plan for the operations? How do you go from an asset management perspective, not the just the actual physical asset itself, but thinking in terms of management involves a lot more people and a lot more capabilities that are needed. And the exciting thing now is, then, especially with now that we're going to talk about Chat GPT as well too, as AI comes into play, having data in a machine readable format is good for humans, but it's also good for machines, obviously, when you start connecting the dots. And how do we collaborate in that type of environment to make these kind of decisions? There are owners that presented in the previous ALN session, like the California community colleges, that actually have a lot of assets, 5,000 buildings statewide and 742 at the Los Angeles Community College level. And they're able to use a lot of different tools. And this is, we're going to be showing some tools and applications here, but it really is not about the specific application. It's about using any tool that you can, connecting the data together and making decisions. And it's become a lot easier to build applications nowadays too. In fact, we built one for the BIMStorm session that we used for planning and organizing this and to get information out to all the participants. For the community colleges, they really focus on having a space inventory and managing spaces. We're making decisions about, where to spend resources, but also how to use it for facility management and operations, we found over the years that having information about space and data associated with it, what happens in that building, in that space, with assets in the building, in the space, and how does an organization actually use that, is an important piece of all this. And the LA Community College District has 742 buildings, like I mentioned, 12 million square feet, and they have everything in building information modeling systems and GIS and CMMS, and used for work orders to support their mission. So anyway, this is, the BIMStorm is kind of a theoretical exercise, but it's based on actual things that are happening across many different owner organizations that we've interacted with. And that's what we want to walk through today, how that actually works. So, like I mentioned, we captured the business process. So we have a business process model that was created. The business process, it sounds complicated, but it's really pretty straightforward. If you think in terms of how do you make an apple pie? There are inputs and outputs. You want to bake the apple pie, you have ingredients, you have resources, and you have outputs of what do you do with it once it's done. What are the rules? What are the recipes for building that? And we look at things like this. If you break it down into pieces, then you can start repurposing it and say, well, maybe we don't want an apple pie. We want to bake a cherry pie or whatever, or a chicken pie. And we use the same thing for this BIMStorm for ALN. We said, okay, let's capture all the steps associated with standards and rules like the ISO 55000 standards, and start defining the recipe of how this all comes together. And all of this was used to kind of drive the conversation as we prep for today's session, and to understand what the inputs and outputs, who's involved, what are the steps, and this becomes a way to communicate how we're working on this. And this, it's a very simple spreadsheet, but this spreadsheet feeds into an application that was built, an app that's called AppSheet. It's a very
Kimon.
simple note. Yeah. Go ahead.
Before you talk about AppSheet, which is really good, can I just emphasize the rules, policy, standards column here? So Kimon had the spreadsheet about the project, which is putting together the BIMStorm. And then Nick and I requested a column so that we could relate different parts of the project to ISO 55001 standards and have a description of what we mean by that, because Nick and I know what it means when we say ISO 55001 4.2. That's involving all relevant stakeholders, but other people don't, so that there's a way of being able to indicate which standards are important to use. And this can actually be for the life cycle of the project too, because if you are being certified to what you said you were going to do, you have your documentation for your project all set. So I just wanted to point out how he adopted or adapted this to include standards.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. Yeah, and in fact, when I was building this, and everybody helped fill it in too, but I'm somewhat familiar with 55001, obviously with the interactions through ALN. I don't know all the details of it. I even asked ChatGPT, can you fill in some of the descriptions? It might be a little bit off, but like Jack mentioned too, you can get a good starting point, but then you need humans to kind of come in and help fill in the gaps. I think that's another message here. But the other point I wanted to make relating to this spreadsheet about procedures and descriptions and inputs and outputs, all of this is a database, which means from that database, you can build an application. And it's become much easier to build applications. This is an app that was built literally in a few hours, basically, that takes this exact same data and reformats it in a way that makes it easier to digest and understand. So for example, if say who's involved with it, you have a who column and it has all the people that were involved with the setup. It's all coming from the spreadsheet. So if the spreadsheet changes, the application changes. And I think this is a huge shift that's happening in the industry, that everybody can literally become an application developer. In other words, we are processors of information that's valuable, data as an asset that can be used and communicated, and it doesn't have to only go through emails or PDFs. Basically, it becomes a way to to use data to drive information.
And what this does is something that Kimon was using as an analogy 15, 17 years ago. He was using Expedia back then, but now it's Travelocity. We do not own the Hertz rental car database. We do not own the pricing system for American Airlines flights. We don't have the ability to seat ourselves in the pilot seat, and we have no idea about hotel maintenance. But the information that they provide comes together in a dashboard for us to plan our business trip or plan our vacation. And having the ability to create these apps brings us to that level. And 15 years ago, the industry couldn't even get their mind around it. But now it's not as crazy to be saying this.
So I'm going to jump back to some of the work that we did with the National Institute of Building Sciences. And I don't know if Roger's audio is on or not, but if
I'll
he
make
is, he
him
can
a
jump in.
panelist. I'll make him a panelist.
Okay, Roger, thanks for joining us. So this is a little bit about developing standards for the industry, but also developing owner-specific standards. So different owners have requirements. So for example, a healthcare owner would have requirements in how they put a hospital or clinic together. A lot of these requirements traditionally have been put into Excel files or PDF files or people's heads. But we treat everything as a database, which means that we have a database of all these different room types for a hospital. And this now we're leading into this actual BIMStorm exercise. We'll be using this. This is about a combination of industry standards, owner standards, a database driving into building information modeling, and then creating an interface that doesn't require you to be a technical expert in BIM or even a technical expert in healthcare facilities, but it gives you at your fingertips information to make decisions about how do we plan a clinic for an emergency situation, or for something we need to build 12 months from now, or something we need to deploy 4 weeks from now, like we did in the Kharkiv scenario that we did for BIMStorm. Roger, thanks for joining us. Do you have anything you'd like to add about from the owners? I know the NIBS has been involved a lot of owners, complex owners that have very similar challenges and needs.
You need to turn your mic on, Roger.
Mic needs to be on. Yeah, now I got it. Thanks, Kimon. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, great to be here. Yes, as you've pointed out, Kimon, this is a problem or opportunity area for many owners. They want to build on their integrating the whole process across the life cycle and going from planning into operations, and picking up this information wherever and whenever it's created and reusing it and getting access to it is really critical. There's some challenges, but it's one of these problems you keep chipping away at and things improve and the benefits build. So it's great to be thinking about how sharing this with people and what's going on and what can be done, and how owners can get the value that they've been a little bit left out of in the whole equation of how we apply technology in the building industry. That we need it everywhere, but owners probably they pay the bill, but they haven't gotten, I would say, full value yet. So it's exciting to be involved in helping to make that happen, and seeing where this is going. How do we express requirements in a way they can be reused and built on? So yeah, happy to be here to help in any way I can.
Great, thanks, Roger. Yeah, and what we found too is obviously we're looking at healthcare facilities here too, but it can apply to others. The formula is basically the same if you think about the underlying technology and the strategy. It's about assets at the building level, at the room level, at the equipment level, and the connectivity between them. It doesn't matter that it's this is healthcare or this is an airport or whatever. It's the same approach that we found that can be replicated and organized. So we're going to run through a little exercise here. I'll do it on screen, and some of you have seen this, but I wanted to walk through this again because we're going to be replicating this process a bit later on and with using ChatGPT, but this is the process of selecting for a healthcare facility. So if we say for a healthcare facility, we need exam rooms. And this was set up like an Amazon shopping cart. So you can go and say, okay, I want this exam room here. I want a screening room, and I need some other support facilities, a break room, a day room. So selecting these and adding numbers here ends up with a shopping cart. So if I go to the shopping cart, and this is a very simple, 5-room clinic or part of a clinic.
I think we
and
need
I would-
3 exam rooms, Kimon.
Oh, good point. Let's add another one. So just like in Amazon, when you start changing these numbers, it's updating the order in the background, and it's not burdening you with saying, well, what do you need in the exam room? It's already figured out. It's a template that can still be adjusted. And this is what usually takes a lot of time, is kind of organizing what we know to start a project off, and even to communicate that to the designer or the builder. So from an owner's perspective, having this type of information already exists somewhere. It's usually scattered all over the place from our experience. But if we collect it into a database, like I showed earlier, a spreadsheet, but a more database that's connected with the relationships and everything, this space has equipment in it. This equipment has costs associated with it. It has electrical requirements. It has other characteristics, but I'm going to go ahead and just build this first version of it and request a BIM to be built. So it's actually building information model from that data in the background that could be shifting and adjusting on the fly. The owner might say, well, this year we don't need that piece of equipment in the room, and it would drop off. That's how this was set up. So now it's generated a model. And if I go into my email, I see this message here that says, okay, we have your model ready. So I'd like whoever is willing to jump in, I'll walk through this again, but it'd be nice if we get a few requests like this, and I'll walk through it once more time, but I just want to show you first how this process works. If I click on the BIM gallery, then it builds that BIM from the request that I just made. So it's going and grabbing the data, creating the graphic, creating reports, and creating a button that allows me to download it or export it into other applications like Revit or even Excel if I want an Excel file. So here are the rooms that I requested. These rooms have assets in them. The assets have data associated with them, what type of light that is, other information. And I can go in here and say, I want to email this to Mike. So Mike's going to get it in his email. So I can start sharing. So it's basically about using the cloud technologies like this to be able to quickly assemble information and then send it off. So there's obviously, I'm a human here, I'm interacting with a machine. I'm sending it to Mike, who's going to make other decisions. But later on, I'm going to show how ChatGPT, we wanted to replicate this process using ChatGPT. Can an AI actually go in here and do something with this type of a workflow?
So Nick has,
one more. Go ahead.
you're going to do one more?
Yeah, I'll walk through it one more time. If anybody wants to follow along, we'll put the link in the link
Nick
already in the
had put
chat.
the link in there.
Okay, so if you go to the link, go to the healthcare tab. And then if you scroll down, you can either scroll down through the whole list, or you can start typing and saying, like Mike said, let's get an exam room. If I type exam room, it lists all the exam rooms that are available. And then you just type in a number like 1, or just bump up the numbers here 2. Select a few rooms like that. And you'll have a number in each of these boxes, and you can continue adding to your shopping cart. It's just like an Amazon shopping cart. And then if I go to the,
Go to the
go
cart.
ahead, Mike. Yeah, go to the cart. Mhm.
And click there, and then you have to enter your, if
You
you want
enter
to make
your
any
email.
last minute changes.
Yeah, you can change this number up or down. You say, I don't really want 2, I want 1, and I want 2 of these or 3 of these. And then you add your email here, and you say build a BIM of the selected spaces. So this is simulating an owner setting up. It's basically baking that apple pie, right? I want these ingredients for the apple pie. Now I'm going to send it over to the baker or whoever's going to cook it and put that together, or to the architect to put it together, or to somebody further on down the line, maybe to a facilities team that says, what do you guys think? We're getting ready to build this clinic. Is there anything that would be of concern to facilities to maintain it? So we're trying to jump ahead in the life cycle, or to a risk management, from a risk management perspective, or to total cost of ownership. Is this going to cost us a lot to maintain and support? And I don't know if Deke is on. Maybe he could say a few words here if he's on, but if not, we can cover for him. But
No, we'll definitely bring Deke in. I was just putting the link in one more time, and I wanted to encourage especially our new friends and our non-technical friends. Mary Adams is here, and we're gonna hopefully hear from her about how to relate the outcomes of our buildings to more than just the bottom line, to social, environment, social governance issues. And Mary, if you were to go to the link and select some items and put it in a building for this exercise, that would be great. And also, before I'm making Deke, Nick, will you make Deke a panelist? Actually, he might be a panelist already.
Come on, what I think is interesting too is I think, you know, the question about what you want to end up with is an interesting one, because you know, looking at those clinics, there's a lot in there, and maybe that's helpful. It's you need all the detail to be able, in some ways, to use less detail, because I know there's a lot of conversation around, we want to have a digital representation of something. Well, do we need every piece and part, or do we just need the critical components? How do we organize that? But the important thing is having that structure there, and then you can add or take things off. So I think that idea of, you know, having the information accessible and structured is really important, because then you can match it better to your uses for the information. And
Yeah, Roger, that's a great point. And new member is CDV Systems. Cyril Verily is an architect along a path much like Kimon, and he has been working with owners for them to harvest their building information models to get the level of detail information that they need at the time they need it. We might be able to hear from Cyril later, but definitely in the presentation in 3 weeks from now. So also,
yeah,
I want to go ahead.
Well, I think Deke's going to come on, but I brought this point up knowing he was coming, because I remember him telling me once, you know, it's easy to take detail off, but it's pretty hard to add it back in when you don't have it. So there's a kind of an interesting opportunity here with working with these underlying information sources and structures.
Deke, if you want to turn on your microphone and respond to Roger.
I'm glad he remembered that one. That's an important one. Yeah, you can always summarize detail, but you can't go the other way. And I think that's a key element here and what's nice about this collaboration environment is that you're getting the authoritative sources to be able to provide the information. And then, you know, everybody gets to share that information.
So Mark
Right.
Giuliani made an interesting point that I want to call out in the comments. He was talking about how this approach can help owners build better RFPs. And the ALN just had a meeting this morning for a new Cities and Places Asset Leadership Board. And we're going to try to spread best practices throughout municipalities. But one of the things that we're going to do is write a sample RFP so people can understand how to request asset management or how to request building processes and total cost of ownership in this manner. If people don't know how to ask for it, it will never get out there.
Yeah, and since you brought that the screen up, there's a few. This is the the 5-minute total cost of ownership approach here. we've worked so much in the design and construction area, and we look at first cost, but probably almost 80% of the costs are after handover. And so if we're going to be sustainable, we're going to do all these things, we really need to engage the owner, number one, and then make sure that we track and understand all the costs that are involved with that facility. And not necessarily just operations and maintenance, but using it, populating it, bringing employees in and things like that, and the costs that they incur. And then what is the social impact? We're talking, the whole BIMStorm is, you mentioned, a woman's health facility. What is the societal benefit of having that type of facility? So I think that's where you really need to look at that big picture, recognizing that most of the decisions that are made in design and construction are going to have a huge impact on that, on not only the operations and maintenance, but also its use and its benefits. One of the things that we worked on and Jack was involved in that, and many others, in this APA TCO standard that's out there now. And if you look at the 13 principles of APA TCO, what's the key word that shows up in almost every one of them? Assets. Okay, I mean, that's what we're talking about. We've got to have a good asset management system in order to do total cost of ownership. And once you have that, doing total cost of ownership is just a kind of a small step from that point. And I guess playing to what Kimon is a master of is pulling all these sources together. The owner has a tremendous amount of information. It's disconnected at this point. And so the point is, how do we bring all these pieces together so that you can do TCO without having to really gather any additional information? Just take advantage of most of the information that you already have, whether it's in your IWIM system or whether it's in your model COBE, whether it's in your personnel system, looking at training. And again, we're looking at that bigger picture where you're all the people are occupying. What kind of trades do you have available to you? What kind of resources do you have available to you as far as dollars and things like that? So all these pieces come together, and I think, like I say, I look at TCO as kind of a metric also as to identifying the value of the work that you're doing with your BIM and things like that.
Jack Dempsey, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to kind of highlight that the National Academies just came out with a report on the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and it talked about the problems of underfunding facilities and the impact that has had on NIST mission. So it could be any organization, and I think like a woman's health clinic is a good example of any organization that provides societal benefits. I mean, benefits to the end consumers. The study that NIST found was, and it's a traditional way, you look at PRV, present replacement value, and you budget maintenance requirements as a percentage of that. And generally they look at 2 to 4% of PRV. So it's basically the building gets renewed, replenished over a course of a life cycle of about 50 to 60 years or so. So that's how they get that calculation. The study found that, and the recommendation from the study, as a member of that study as well, was NIST requires $6 billion investments over the next 12 years just to arrest and mitigate impacts to mission, which is basically says the 2 to 4% of PRV is really not relevant in how you might think about some of these questions, and it gets to the societal benefits. And the simple response to that is, if America isn't making those investments in NIST, we have a broad understanding of NIST being critical to America's competitiveness. Others are. China is. Europe is. And by not making those investments, we're losing the scientists and America's ability to lead in certain areas which are critical to our commerce. Likewise, the health of the individual that might be going to that clinic. So I think the work that has been done here with the TCO, and Nick was Dick was at the helm. I had an opportunity to help out on that. Is really advanced work, and it's kind of exciting on Kimon how you're showing how all this stuff kind of streams into this. It's kind of like all in the cake is just really exciting, and the opportunities to be able to consolidate or condense a lot of what we're doing here, simplifying it overall. So yeah, this is good stuff.
It's the pie,
Great.
Jack. It's all in the
Yeah.
pie. But I guess the
So
same
maybe-
applies to cake, right, Kimon?
That's right. Well, this looks like a cake here, but going back to what Roger and Deke and Jack just said, it's interesting because if we use those exact comments that were made, so Roger's comment about the level of detail, for example, when you zoom all the way out, you see these little chiclets here, but inside these, there's information about what goes into this exam room. This is what we made earlier, the request that we made. So all of this is important to some people. They want to know how the sink is sitting here and what this, do we have all the equipment here? But then if you zoom out, other users might say from a total cost of ownership, which is actually a true use case. Los Angeles Community College wants to know which rooms have tile and which ones have carpet and how much is going to cost us to clean these rooms, right? That's important information too. So that abstraction level is important, but you also need to have the data in the background to drive that. So this is the request that we made. The scenario here that we set up for this BIMStorm is we're planning a clinic in Ankara, right? So we have all the pieces now. We could start to assemble them. I'm not going to go through and do the whole assembly here, but essentially it ends up looking like this. This was done in one of the previous BIMStorms by Mark Giuliani Architects. He basically took the requirements and laid it out. And this is a BIM of all the stuff in there. And then if we zoom back into, now we don't want to land it somewhere in Ankara in Turkey. So we have a map, it's a GIS map, but inside the GIS map, there are BIM objects, the ones that we were just looking at. And if we look at them here, we see an assembly and what I mentioned earlier. So we have the clinic that we just were looking at, but we also have the microgrid objects that were designed last time in the BIMStorm. We know that a 20 kilowatt array needs this much, and a containerized solar microgrid needs a shipping container that looks like that. So we were actually running scenarios of if we don't have power and we need to have a field hospital, what kind of resources do we need to support this clinic? What's the minimum that we need? And then what happens if we want to start building up more capabilities? So this particular clinic that we landed here in Ankara, we say, okay, let's move it over and find a site. And I'm going to be a little bit rough here because I'm not actually designing it, but it's okay here. We're going to put it on this parking lot site. So by having an actual geospatial location gives us immediate feedback of, does it fit here? First of all, what are the logistics of building on this site? Can we get those shipping containers from port to here in the right amount of time if it's a temporary field hospital? There's a lot of different technical logistical questions from an asset management perspective, and also design and construction questions that need to be answered very quickly before we make the wrong turn and go in the wrong direction. And that's what these BIMStorms have been about. Even for actual projects, we actually run through like this. So I'm going to pause here because I want to kind of shift after this to how we can start automating this more, even more than what we showed here. We did some experimenting with ChatGPT that I want to walk through next. So Mike, do you have any other comments you'd like to make about this?
I like what you said about total cost of ownership and carpets and tiles. Ryan Gear is online and he's involved in tiles. And for the final presentation, he's going to be able to give us information about the tiling that building that Mark Giuliani laid out, and provide information on the cleaning products needed for that. So Los Angeles Community College could understand from the beginning what they needed if they were going to use tile floor for this whole project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
now
I
City
like
College,
that.
they actually are using APA standards for that custodial planning. So it's a very specific use case of they needed to know actual areas to plan the levels of service that they provide to that building based on the floor finish and based on the custodial staff. So it kind of goes to a very specific use case.
I love bringing it down to the floor. I mean, it doesn't get more boots on the ground than planning
Mhm.
for the floor maintenance.
Okay, so maybe if it's okay, I'll shift over to this. We can jump back. It's kind of a workshop environment here, so I think it's okay that we're jumping. And in fact, maybe we even reinforce this is going to continue We're doing this virtually offline as well too. So during these live workshops, but also there are continuing exercises that have been happening. But one thing that we tried, we said, okay, everything that I showed you earlier about, let's ask the program to give us those spaces in the Amazon shopping cart to build a clinic. Let's put it on the site. What do we need for that? We said, what if we ask the same question to ChatGPT? What would it do? And we tried it both in the newer version, the 4.0 and 3.5. There's slight variations in speed and the types of answers that we get, but it's pretty consistent as far as, okay, it spits something out. So we said, okay, what if we can teach it? The first thing we did is we said, okay, we have a table in Excel of spaces that we think we need. The owner's saying we want these spaces for this clinic. We said, okay, or these are the types of spaces that a clinic has. So we said, if we can teach ChatGPT that these are the types of spaces that are needed for a clinic, we asked this, the first step we did is we said, store this table of values for a clinic. And we gave it a little bit of hint of what the table was about. There's occupants, there's maximum number of people. We said, okay, store this. So it said, sure, here's a table. It stored it in its memory. Once it was in its memory, we said, create an architectural, and this was a very specific ask. And this is the key thing that we found with ChatGPT and AI. The more precise you can get in your questions, you get more consistency in the output, but you still have to check it. Like Jack said, it's not perfect. And we found that as well too. We said, create an architectural program for design and give us a table with these room types to account for a population of 5,000. So remember in the previous one, I gave it a hint of how many people are per room, per exam room. And then we also said, extrapolate any additional spaces that are needed. In other words, we're saying, we're giving you a list of spaces. Tell us what else you think we might need. We wanted to give it a little bit of a prompt to do more. And it said, sure, here's an example of an architectural program. So it created a whole new program here, stable format. Very simple table, basically the name of the space, how many of those spaces do we need with the square foot occupancy. And it actually added some more in there. It said, note that this is just an example. Calculation of additional spaces require more information. So it wanted more information. But it gave us this table. Then I said, adjust it to assume, oh, this is when I spotted the mistake. It said you need 50 exam rooms. I go, wow, that sounds like a lot. I forgot to tell it that the exam rooms are not constantly filled with patients. They're coming on, every 60 days. I said, what if we adjust it for 60 days and they only need 30 minutes per exam and the clinic is open from 9 to 5? Can you adjust this table and give us a new table?
Oh, you're
And so
saying that
sure.
humans make mistakes too, Kimon?
Oh yeah. We're not perfect. That's the interesting part about this, is that the more that we can automate the mundane stuff, the AI can check us and prompt us to do things, but we also need to be on the lookout, I think, especially in these early stages as we're learning. I know this is going to get better over time. And the response was, okay, sure, it adjusted it. And it said, here's the assumptions I made. So it's basically using this, it gave us this calculation of how it made these assumptions, and it adjusted the table now. And it added a waiting room. So you're probably going to need a waiting room. We did have a waiting room in the list. So it's starting to do things like that. It knows that this is a clinic. It knows that it needs space. It knows that how many patients are there. It adjusted the program like that. And then I said, why does the table show 50 exam rooms if your calculation is for 14? Because it told me it adjusted for 14. And then I scrolled down and I saw 50 here. So I spotted an error there. This was all happening within minutes. It was detailed. Then it said, I apologize. The table shows 50. I'm going to adjust it now. And then it gave me, and it says it's going to adjust. And I said, can you create a new table? So then it said, sure, here's a new table for the calculation. And then I noticed that it dropped the room ID from it. I said, can you add the room, well, not the room ID, the room code, each space way back in the original table.
Technical difficulty. And Kimon, we're not able to hear you at this point. Kimon, we're silent. So Yong, I was going to ask you if you feel like maybe you're going to get replaced at Onuma Inc. because of Chat GPT.
Hey, Mike. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Young Kim. I'm a project manager at Onuma. I know this is scary, right? How much of the machine can actually replace the person. So I was actually happy to see that one little error that Kimon actually had to manually pick up. One of the things that as we get Kimon's audio back on, one of the things stepping back a little bit, and I think we talked about this at the beginning a little bit, just so everyone knows, the whole point of these BIMStorms, a big part of it is collaboration and the other part is exploration. So everything that you guys are seeing right now, we're not saying that, okay, now this is the way that people should use Chat GPT or any of these technologies. One of the things that we're interested in is the explanation component of this. And even to have the kind of session that we have right now, I know webinars have been going on for many years. What was interesting for us in the context of BIMStorm is like 3 years ago when COVID hit and everyone was locked down, the whole idea of, oh my gosh, we can't actually meet face to face. How do we still continue to work? That was actually a very big, important question for many people. And one of the things that we were interested in is seeing, like at Onuma, for instance, we have been collaborating virtually in many respects. So one of the things that we were actually pretty encouraged is that people, when actually pressed, they can quickly shift their culture and pick up new tools and technologies, and also shift their culture in terms of how they start to work with each other. So one of the things that we are interested as we go ahead and continue the whole theme of these BIMStorm is how to push that envelope. And then so what you're seeing here with, for example, with Chat GPT, this is just one example, one slice of a new technology that we've seen recently, and we want to sort of press the envelope in terms of seeing how we can go ahead and press that into service. Hey, Kimon, you're back.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I was waving my arms too much. My headset flew off.
There you go.
Kimon gets excited about this.
Right. I think that's a good segue, though. We're talking about the pros and the cons of technology. So
There you
that's
go.
very fitting.
Yeah.
And the ability to adapt.
Right.
Yeah. So where was I? Okay, so I was walking through this. So I went back and forth. This was happening pretty quickly as I was going through it, but it was missing the type. I noticed that it was missing a column. So I said, you're missing a column. Can you add it back, basically? And it went through and actually added it and matched it again. And by doing that, I ended up with a finished program that looked like this. Basically, I'm zooming ahead here. I had a cleaned up version that looked like it was ready to go. And the reason I wanted it in this format is because this can be imported into what I showed you earlier that generated those spaces. So I took this table and fed it into the system rather than going through the Amazon shopping cart and picking things. I used the output from what ChatGPT calculated to then go and say, okay, import it in, land it in Anchor, and build the program. So here's the actual BIM of all the spaces that came from that ChatGPT output. So this is still a first version, but I can see that the more that you can connect the dots and automate between these systems, you can actually skip a few steps in between. But just this alone actually was pretty interesting because we could see the flow from the request down to the actual BIM on the site.
So as far as we know, this is the first artificial intelligence generated building information model.
I don't know about that. I'm sure others are testing other ways of doing that because there's so much interest in this. But yeah, it's the first one that I've seen as far, but I'm sure there's
First
others
one
out there.
publicly displayed.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what else others are doing because, and I'm showing a lot of our system here, but it's really not only about this because the way that we work is we like to connect to other platforms. So if there's a platform that does energy analysis, for example, we could take this data here and start connecting to it and do that type of analysis. Yeah, but that's the end result here. And then obviously the actual organizing of the spaces, a human came in and actually moved them around, but that can be automated as well too. But the question is, how far is this going to go? And this goes back to Jack's point of how reliable was AI be? And I think for now, it's kind of a combination of using the capabilities of AI along with the tools that we have, and then starting to refine the process and connect the dots to automate more of it, because that's what we've been doing for the last 20 years, even for our system. It started off very kind of manual, and the more and more we connected things, we can start pushing buttons and it generates a shopping cart, for example. The next step after this is to export it to
Jack
Kobe and
wants
go.
to, one second,
Yeah, go
please. Jack, you wanted to
Yeah.
comment?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I see the note too, amazing. This is actually really amazing. And the exploration that happens is pretty impressive as we learn the structure. The experiences I've had, I just want to comment on this because I do think it's part of the chat GPT kind of phenomenon. Is when I started asking questions, I get answers, but then I have to kind of refine my answers. It forced me to challenge back to the specifics of what the requirement is or what exactly I was looking for. I found frequently it took kind of a couple iterations to draw upon that, and even challenge chat GPT's answers on, I don't think you got this right. Can you reevaluate this answer? And I've done that with kind of more, more general, kind of strategy, organizational change, stuff like that. But come on, when you just demonstrated here in terms of getting into the mechanics of specificity, even in some respects, the calculations, I mean, there's many things that had to happen from like a planner's perspective to come up with some of those answers. So, what happens if you have a very intelligent, well-informed planner who's learning how to train this system to kind of like as a cyborg, kind of like advance their ability to make decisions or gain insights? I mean, it's almost limitless. This is pretty exciting to see what you've done here.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting what could be possible. This is, like I said, we're still scratching the surface, but it's doing a lot. It's kind of scary in many ways how far it can go, even with a simple exercise. But yeah, imagine everything that we just did now is landed in a database, right, with this geometry and data. And from our system, for example, we have what's called an API. An API publishes out this information, which is another very important piece from an asset management and data perspective, is that applications must be open, regardless of open standard or not. If they're not open and they hold the data in their tool, then that's the dead end, because a lot of applications from the past, that was their end goal. We're going to stuff all the data into our systems, and then you're going to buy our system forever. That doesn't scale. You need to be able to read out from that. So we publish that data out, and it comes out in a table that looks like this. And the app that I showed you earlier, this is a live version of it now. This is coming from our system, and we're looking at the clinic, the spaces in the clinic. This goes back to Roger's point again, that we're not looking at the geometry, but we're looking at that space in the clinic of the workroom, how many square feet it is, what's the floor ID, what other, floor finish, whatever else was available there, and everything that we're looking in Ankara too, all the buildings, all the microgrid assets are listed here with their capabilities. And this is not just a report, this is live data that's streaming from the server that got the data from chat GPT. Oh, and I forgot to jump into one other thing before I get into that, because I'm going to rewind back to the microgrid. So another exercise that we did with chat, we said, okay, last year we got specifications of a microgrid. We have a spreadsheet in Google Sheets with the kilowatt hours and whatever. This spreadsheet here, I said, learn this. I loaded this into chat GPT, and I said, can you, based on this, tell me what I need for this clinic that I just designed? So it went through and picked out, I don't know, I didn't check to see if it was right or not, but it said, based on what you told me, you need a 24 kilowatt microgrid, backup power, blah, 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 for this clinic that I just designed in ChatGPT that looked like this. This was the field clinic. So, because the clinic that I showed earlier was a full clinic. The next question we asked is, the full clinic is great. This was an interesting question here. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I said, since this clinic will take 12 months to construct, suggest an adjusted program for a temporary field hospital or clinic to provide vital services in an earthquake zone. What are the critical assets for that? And then it said, sure, here's an adjusted program for a smaller clinic to be able to give you basic services. In this adjusted program, we have focused on the most essential service. This is the AI telling me that. I didn't have to give it any prompts. I just basically said, learn about this clinic, learn about the energy needs, give me the adjusted requirements, and give it to me in a table that I can import and generate a BIM from. So this is the result of that stripped down version. So at the same time as we're designing the full clinic, it's adjusting to the minimum clinic and then adding the energy requirements based on our other input. So this is kind of reusing a lot of the knowledge that we collected before to kind of generate that output. And then we said, okay, now we want to ship it to Ankara. What are the logistics of shipping this temporary field hospital? How do we containerize it? How many containers do we need? What are our shipping options? Can we go by over land or by rail, by ship? How much is it going to cost? What are the risks involved if we're shipping? What route should we take? What are the options? What are the risks? So you can read it in more detail here. So we said, okay, let's find the route. And here's the route. So stay away from this area here because there's a lot of conflict up here. So go south.
So before we go on, Alan Redmond from Ireland is signing off because it's really late at night there. But thank you, Alan, for joining us. And he was asking about other AI and BIM. It's in the chat. So interesting activities going on in the chat too.
Right. I see some, oh, yeah, the screenshots happening down here. Okay, well, we're at the hour, Mike.
Yeah,
we
you
could
want
open
to
up
take
for
a
discussion?
yeah.
I covered a lot of stuff here. I went pretty quickly. I can go back in more detail or slow down or have a conversation or where do you want to go with this?
What came in from people using the shopping cart?
I haven't really tracked that because we kind of jumped around, but if there's anybody that created a model like I showed earlier, and you want to send it to me through the BIM mail that I mentioned. So if you received an email that looks like this, and if you go to the BIM gallery, jumping back to where we were 30 minutes ago, about the BIM gallery that generated the model, and then if you click on the email this BIM, it basically takes the link and sends it to me. You just put my email address in, kg@onuma, and I'll receive it. And I think I sent you one, Mike, too, but I haven't really been tracking any other activity in the background.
Okay, I just was curious about that. And then Cyril is making some comments. So I think I'm gonna just even without asking him, I'm gonna promote Cyril to being a panelist. He's been saying some good things, and I wanted to give him the chance to actually say it if he wants to. And then Mark Giuliani has been active. I've seen his name running around. So
Hey, Mike, while you're getting people up there, maybe I'll respond to to Alan's point that he's bringing up about building smart data dictionary, which is kind of aiming at the standards aspect of this. You know, how can we use standards that are out there? Come on, I saw you had Kobe dropped in there. I think to the extent, speaking as someone who does a lot of work with owners, to the extent that we can use these kinds of advancements to implement open standards, it supports your point about having things that are available in tables that can be accessed, and then the open standards take that another step further, because then everybody can understand the structure of the table without having to look for what unique ways it might be made. And the Building Smart Data Dictionary is a common international terminology system that Building Smart International has. It's based on ISO standard for how to organize information about objects in a consistent way. And so, I don't know the specific use case for applying that along with Chat GPT, but I would think there's some potential there because it is structured in a consistent way. So you could teach the bot how to search it, and maybe also how to find things and organize them to populate it, because that's still a challenge, is getting content that we can use in a consistent way. But there's still a lot of need for that to happen with respect to products, with respect to materials, with respect to the structures for how we plan, the construction of assets, like using the IFC model. So, there's a ways to go here, but that could be an interesting next round, maybe, Kimon, to see how far we could go with the standards view of everything. I know it's already sort of baked in here in places, but might be something to think about going further with.
Yeah, that's a great point, Roger. And as we know from experience with other owners that we've both worked with, it's they all want to work with these standards because that creates value for them. A lot of times, like Kobe, for example, in fact, the model that we created here, the first version, immediately from the very early phases of design, we already have it as a Kobe file. So I just exported a Kobe file. Kobe is a great way because it's just an Excel file that has all this stuff in it. So for example, the spaces that we generated are all in here in Kobe format. And all the components, if we wanted the furniture and equipment, it starts showing up here. So separate from the direct connection that I showed with the API, having a standard way to exchange the files and consistency with Kobe. And it can happen from the very beginning of the project. It doesn't have to happen at the very end. That's another important thing that we're seeing over and over again, that the sooner that we can get this type of interaction of, is it being formatted this way to be ready to be delivered at the end of construction or during design construction as well, in an open standard way, it creates more certainty for the owner, I guess is the right word here, because a lot of times you get to the end of the project and things are not organized and you start, all the stuff kind of just goes poof and it goes away.
Yeah, thank you, Roger, for bringing the owner's perspective into that and actually talking about other uses, extending what Kimon does to other uses. And that's what Cyril was saying about being able to do checks. You want to elaborate on that, Cyril?
No, it's interesting. We were involved recently with a 70-story high-rise tower in downtown Las Vegas, and the architects, this is all in pre-design, and we were hired to model from an SD perspective this 70-story tower, and we had a program, and we had the requirements for all these various types of hotel rooms, 4- and 5-star hotel rooms. And as we were laying this out, we kept saying to ourselves, there's not enough space for all of the elevators and the MEP staffs that are going to be going through this building, because we were involved with a different project 2 years before that, which was this 14,000 room hospital project, which has huge requirements for MEP services to all these different spaces and heat air exchanges. And I'm just watching as Kimon was building this program. Holy crap! If you can define the types of air, the air change requirements, the heating and cooling requirements, that can size the ducting for you, and you can know that in pre-design. That's priceless. Oh my gosh! Because these shafts are massive, and for a 70-story high-rise tower, the designers were not considering how much space these devices need. And so I think just things like that, to be able to do an analysis with this AI is just remarkable. Sizing parking stalls. Oh my gosh! I mean, this site had 90,000 parking stalls. No, just crazy number of parking. I don't recall. Tens of thousands of parking stalls. And if we can predetermine that through an AI, amazing. So this is great, Kimon. Kudos to you. This is really remarkable.
And we'd like to welcome Cyril to the ALN family. CDV Systems is now a member. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you. This is a remarkable. Thank you for having me.
And we look forward to you participating in this ongoing BIMStorm too. That'd be great too.
Definitely. No, I'm excited. I did my first program. So I just sent that to you, Kimon.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah. So
And Cyril, you're at a conference. Can you give us a little, just a short report on what you saw today?
interesting. Yeah. This is called the National Facility Management and Technology Conference in Baltimore, Maryland. It's an annual conference. This conference is new to us, but our focus has been to somehow make BIM useful for owners. And we've been using BIM for 20 years, more from the AEC side of training staff, building models, building content, setting up standards for HOK, SMA, and MVPJ, AECOM, Denver International Airport, Canada Design. And we've discovered that, in the last few years, 5 or 6 years, owners receive these Revit models and they don't know what to do with them. And it's from our perspective, the difficulty is that there's no consistent data standard across the industry. So what we've created is basically a library that allows the owners to define these standards. The library is used by their AEC teams, and when they receive these models, it's a data structure that's where we've got clean data in the models that can be harvested for whatever FM and GIS program that the owner is using. So in talking with these owners here, they all want BIM. They're all at different levels, but I was in a conference today, or I was in a conference today, and there was probably 150 people in the room, and 3 of them were aware of BIM or using BIM. And the person, lecturer is saying, you people have to learn BIM. You people have to become aware of BIM because there's a lot of great data. And that was, I spoke yesterday in a lecture called Harvesting BIM, and it was great. We had a lot of positive feedback and a lot of interest from facility owners. It's not as a difficult nut to crack as people think. So
thank you. We look forward to what you and Kimon are able to collaborate on for our next presentation.
Definitely look forward to it. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to see how this would go into Revit. So that what we should, in fact, this is what you sent just now, right, Cyril? So I see your email. I clicked on it. I see the model that you created in the background, but imagine this then going into Revit or other BIM applications and doing the detail and then tracking, because this is kind of the owner requirement model. Then you start designing it, then there's a delta between them. So if the databases talk to each other, then this is where AI can come in as well too, because a lot of these errors that kind of slip by, you have to kind of manually look at them. But if there's a way to say, okay, go check this database, go check this model, tell us where we're something missing, or maybe something even wrong. If it were, in fact, this is another use case here. What we found. Notice that we put a date stamp on this right here. We said this model is where is it? It's 1 day old, right? Because we're saying this link, how fresh it is. Because if you come back to this tomorrow, the owner requirements, they might have said, well, we don't use this anymore. There's some owners that want to constantly update. Other owners update every year. But the reality is that the faster you can understand there are issues with these requirements, so they don't end up in new designs, because there might have been a new standard that came out for healthcare planning. So this piece of equipment is dangerous, don't use it. That should be available right away. But that's where we're kind of heading, I think, is if all these systems start talking to each other, then you get much more accurate information, and you can make a decision. You can say, well, we'll keep using last year's version, but for other things that are high risk, for example, if we go back to Jack's risk discussion, there might be a need to immediately change something because it's killing people or whatever in a hospital.
So if I can ask you a question, Kimon, just to make sure I understand, if you were to take this program that I sent you, put it into a Revit model, and then decide that there was a particular MRI in some of the spaces that was obsolete, you could change it in the database and it would flag and update my project Revit model?
There's a use case there. When the Revit model takes over, we're assuming that is the lead, but this still stays in the background. Technically we can do it, but we're very aware that when the designers start taking off, there's kind of an ownership. Who owns that decision at that point? Right now, as we're looking at it right now, the owner of this is the owner of the facility that set up the requirement. The requirement might be wrong. So from a how they actually design and construct this, they have to program and they engineer it. They have to make decisions and even break these rules. So if they say, well, this space is too small, you make it larger in Revit, right? But we still maintain the original requirement. And then you're doing a delta check. The owner said this, design said this. Owner said this piece of equipment, architect added another piece of equipment. And those decisions are actually okay as long as you know they're happening. If they're not just happening randomly, then it's actually an okay process. And then if you start seeing a lot of deltas, the other interesting thing is that might mean that the original requirements, this room is too tight. The owner said this has to fit in whatever this is, 240 square feet. It doesn't fit. So we need to adjust the requirement to make this larger or smaller. There's too much stuff in this room, for example.
Right.
You can almost see it right here. This looks pretty crowded to me, but this was a requirement that came from an owner. So, okay, this is what our room looks like.
Amazing.
So yeah, that'd be really interesting to explore a simple exercise like that kind of carries this story forward. And for that clinic, for example,
There needs to be a OBGY space in there. But anyway, we'll
I think, Mike, if I could just say something really quickly,
Please,
that a lot of
please.
people probably already know, but what makes this so powerful is the fact that it's not static. So during the RFP process, today it takes years to get it through Congress, to get the budgets done, to get the AE1 to write the floor plan or design the floor plan in the building. And then somebody wins that project to design it or design build it. It goes through an entire process where things are changing. User group members are changing. The use of the building changes. All of that is now static PDFs that have to be reprinted, that have to be reread. So enabling this to be a menu system that can change on the fly is going to critically reduce the schedule and reduce the amount of money it costs to put these buildings into service.
Thank you, Mark. I was going to call on you to represent owner Mark Giuliani as an ALN Senior Fellow. And in addition to being an architect, he is an owner of all things radio stations and radio tower. Well, not yet the radio tower, but soon to be. So he's got a owner perspective also.
And a longtime participant in BIMStorms, including the planes, trains, and automobiles ones with airports. Mark was responsible.
So Yong, what do you think about the level of participation now compared to other BIMStorms? I'm getting a feel that people are more comfortable with this, and I'm so glad to know that, but I was shocked to hear that only 3 people in a room of 150
Right.
facility managers use BIM.
Right. Actually, it was funny earlier today, Mike, you were saying you were thinking about like when we had our first BIMStorm, and I was looking back, it looks like it was back in 2007. And if you think back, I mean, we had Google, but we didn't have the iPhone yet. We did it like right as the smartphones were really taking off. And I think in terms of participation, it's sort of funny when I think about my younger nieces, they don't realize that there is a world where like smartphones didn't exist. So if you wanted to share a video of yourself, it's like you didn't have to own a TV station. You could just go ahead, shoot a video, and you could share that to millions of people if you wanted to. And so the level, we've really raised the level in terms of how we can start to collaborate and the different kinds of information that we can use and the different platforms that are available. So from our perspective, that's something that's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that right now, obviously, we were touching upon ChatGPT, which is really, I think for some people, it would still be in a little bit of the spooky waters territory, possibly. But if you think back, let's say 20 years ago, people may not have been comfortable driving from point A to point B unless they had a printed map with a highlighter showing the route. And now you're operating a 2,000-pound vehicle and the computer is telling you to turn right or left. So I think one of
itself, Yong.
that's true, right? Exactly. You can take a nap in some cases. So I think we've really started to raise the bar, not only in terms of the technology, but I think the people that are involved and the culture that's surrounding that and the willingness for people to actually embrace that technology.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So I'm curious, Kimon, and Youngku, when people ask you, okay, we've got an existing facility, and we've got a couple of projects that are in Revit, and we're hoping to harvest the data, but we have a lot of buildings that exist in CAD and PDF, but we want to maintain them. And sorry about that. What is your answer to that? I know that you have exactly. So you could explain that. For me, I'm not as aware with what you're doing. I just want to see what the options are, really.
That's a perfect question. Actually, a lot of owners, and this comes down to kind of a strategy. If they have existing facilities, like this particular owner has 5,000 buildings statewide or 742 in Los Angeles. Not all of them have a BIM to this level, but they have asset information about the space, the square footage, how many people are in it. So we told them, we can start with that. You don't have to have everything modeled to that high level of detail, which goes back to Roger's point too. If you have data associated with a location, whether it's a shape on a map or a shape of a space, you can start making decisions about managing those assets. Obviously, when you have a detailed plan, it's more valuable because you can get absolute square footage. When they don't have a plan like this, they're going out with a tape measure and measuring these rims. They're going to be plus or minus 220% because they have curves and angles and whatever. But it's still that room. It's valuable that it knows that it's there. Then as they start doing renovations, then you can say, if you make it as part of your contract requirements, say, okay, if you're going to do any kind of work to this building and you're going to pay somebody to go through and measure or create a plan, let's at least capture that in a standardized process, which goes back to Roger's point. If we create standards of what we call spaces and we have the type of space, then they can start measuring and calculating. And we call that a minimum viable BIM. What's the minimum that we need to actually start making decisions? And not to say that a detailed model would not be valuable too, but having both then allows you to, at the entire campus level, say, how many square feet of laboratory space type A do we have across all these 742 buildings? You can do that. And most large owners can't do that right now. They really can't, especially large government agencies. They're really struggling with just reporting basic stuff. And that's really unfortunate because I think it's more of a governance and thing and not really the technology. It's really and the strategy too, and not and for us as an industry to give them that the right guidance on that, because there's a lot of kind of hype, I think, also on what BIM and GIS and 3D and digital, all of that is great stuff. We all support it, but I think we need to be strategic about how we do that, and then we can get there faster.
Right.
And one thing I would add to that, Cheryl, Kimon, if you could go back to the Program to BIM website and we can look at that catalog with the healthcare system. So one of the things that's kind of interesting, what you mentioned, Cheryl, in terms of maybe if you have some standards, do you have that as a PDF, a library or a collection of PDFs? Actually, what you see here, we actually started from a collection of PDFs with these standards, and we took a look at this and decided, okay, what can you do if you BIMify it? And then after you BIMify it, if you web enable it, and then the ability to not only share these standards as it exists, but then to execute projects, it seems like it opened up a whole wealth of opportunities and workflows. So that was one of the strengths that we definitely like, the idea of information being captured, but then just that simple switch from going from like a static PDF, let's say, to a web enabled system. I mean, that's really sort of the difference between ordering something on Amazon, where it's an electronic catalog of sorts, as opposed to having to wait for like a Sears Roebuck paper catalog, and then you go ahead and analog all your processes. So one of the things that we're really interested in, when you think about all the head scratching that's involved in, let's say, designing one of these dental facilities, that work is the same. So once you have that captured and all the subject matter experts went ahead and designed it, placed the proper equipment, looked at what the actual physical procedures are, like how do the doctors and the medical assistants move around to do that particular operation. And so there's a lot of expertise that's captured here. And once it's captured, then now how do we go ahead and move it from a static PDF version to something that can make it much more collaborative for a wider organization and subject matter experts.
Sure. No, that's great. Brilliant.
So we're heading to the end of the session, right, Mike? But maybe I
Yes.
have one more kind of parting question here. Is kind of where we started off here. What do we think? Is this a threat to the industry, or what will people's reaction be as this progresses more? Obviously, this is the first example of using AI to do some kind of basic programming, but as this progresses more, it's going to start automating more of these things. And I mean, any thoughts there? I have some
Don't-
thoughts, but I want to hear.
Don't stop. No, this is amazing. Oh my gosh. This is, I mean, I remember when our clients used to get the SEPs Excel files, and it was a list of rooms and a list of all the rooms, and we had to put that into one database to try to get it into Revit. And wow, I mean, that SEPs to BIM is brilliant. This whole AI puts it on steroids. So
That's what could scare people, though. Jack Dempsey,
Mhm.
what do you think?
really.
Mhm.
Yeah, the immediate thing I saw is the decision. There's still a decision point. There's accountability for decisions being made, and there's liabilities associated with that. So I think Chat GPT and AI is going to have it's going to be like water in the cracks. It's going to fill everything we do. It's going to touch everything we do. I think one of the complicating factors is going to be figuring out when you're making a decision or signing off on a decision, did Chat GPT make that decision or did a human make that decision? And I think there's going to be an important aspect. I mean, kind of, throwing out that loosen edge idea is, when we start getting that type of awareness, that type of functionality, how do we deal with that? And I think that's an element of that event horizon. And but I think, I mean, there's nothing we can do to stop it. Let's put it that way. It's going to be exciting to see what we can do with it. But I think the governance, Kimon, you made a point a little bit earlier, a lot of the problems we have is governance or, kind of mundane organizational decision-making. Just make one plug to the ISO management system standards. And policy and strategy are kind of cool, but most people don't want to spend a whole lot of time thinking about that. But it defines particularly the management system defines the framework of how decisions get made. That's really kind of a conversation about governance. And I think as we structure that, we're going to learn how to accelerate the use of these management systems. And actually, ISO has dozens of management systems that use the same harmonized structure. That's just going to help us accelerate things. So it's just going to be really impressive. But I think it still has to come down to that loosen edge element of where's the human and who's really taking accountability for the risks that are being considered in these decisions.
And I would like to bring us back to emergency relief, disaster preparedness. We got away from that because the technology is that impressive that we're exploring. But what better place to have the ability for quick decisions and rapid deployment assisted by artificial intelligence than in emergency relief and assisting first responders. And so I think we're really onto something with applying this to disaster relief and the formulas that could be used to help us understand, as Kimon was pointing out, how much is needed for a certain circumstance. And we immediately know if it's 10 or 20 containers, and you can start acting on it. And if we validate the information and we address what Jack Dempsey just mentioned, and we can trust the data, then we can actually act very quickly. And I'm really excited about where this can go, and really happy that Kimon is using the Asset Leadership Network as a platform for sharing this information. So thank you very much, Kimon. Thank you, Jack Dempsey. Thank you, Roger Grant, Deke Smith, Cyril Verily, Mark Giuliani, Yong Kim, Nick for getting us started. And actually, Nick, or Kimon, we'll let you say a final note And then Nick will run the credits. And thank you
Yeah.
to all the attendees and for the lively comments and discussions.
Yeah, thanks everybody for participating, and it was very interesting for us as well too. We've learned a lot. But back to this whole human AI interaction, I think it's our opportunity to be part of this. If we ignore it, obviously you lose that opportunity, and that's when you lose. You don't create value by that. That's really a collaborative thing that we have to be part of, I think. We'll look back at this 10 years or 5 years from now, and it'll seem like nothing probably, but it's a good start, I think. Thanks for
Yes, indeed.
organizing this.
Thank you, Kimon.
Thank you, Kimon.
If you can stop sharing your screen, then Nick can
Yeah.
run the final
Yeah.
credits. Or I can just say thank you to our platinum organizational member. Wait, don't I have this? Let me see. I think I might have this right here. No, just thank you, Kimon, Onuma, and Onuma Inc. Oh, Nick was tending to his young child and came back just in time.
No, I think something's going on with my internet, but I'll try quickly to just say thank you to our platinum organizational member Onuma System and Kimon Onuma for his time today, as well as Yong Kim. Thank you to our patron members for their continued support of this and other programming, and all our organizational members for making this possible. And thank you to the participants today. Very lively workshop, and it is all of you that make this worth doing. So thanks, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow on ALN Thursday at 3 with Richard Culbertson.
It's a very fascinating discussion that Rich has about the fact that all utilities don't know what assets they have, and therefore they are violating federal regulations that require reporting, and they're asking for rate increases, but they're not able to justify what they're doing because they don't even know what they have. So I'm not trying to destroy utility organizations, but we want to use a forceful hand to show them to use asset management, a structured approach to asset management, to be able to address, life and death issues. We're going to be talking about gas explosions and stuff. Anyway, so there's a little pitch for tomorrow. But then on April 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern, we'll be back and have a final presentation. Please contact me and we'll involve you in doing exercises and get you involved in the final presentation. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And yay, that worked really well.